All right, we got some people here. So hello, thanks everyone for joining us for today's webinar on evolving continuous delivery using feature flags. We have a lot to go through today, so I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to let everyone know a few things up top. One, we are recording. If maybe you need to leave partway through, you have a colleague who was unable to join, they will be able to view this session later on. Two, you can ask questions. Please, as soon as you think of a question, go right ahead and ask it. Even if you think maybe it'll come up during the course of the presentation, we'd rather know what it is you want to ask about than have you not ask. So let's move on a little bit and go over today for presenters. We're going to have Nick Rendell, product marketing here at CloudBees. Shouldn't have started on the last name theme. We're going to have Justin, solutions architect with CloudBees, and we're going to have Doug, technical marketing here at CloudBees. We're going to talk about what are feature flags, continuous delivery with the status quo, adding feature flags to continuous delivery. We're going to have a live demo on adding feature flags to continuous delivery, and then we're going to have time for Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to our first presenter, Nick.
Very good, thank you, Max. We're actually going to start. This is kind of a new concept in the world of CI/CD using feature flags with continuous delivery. So we actually wanted to start and kind of take a temperature of the room and see, where are you all at today if you are already using feature flags within your CD processes, and or maybe you don't know, or you aren't at all, but we'll give you about a minute to fill out that poll. And we'll kind of read the results so you can see where your peers are at as well.
We got votes coming in kind of quick. I'm going to leave it open a little bit longer to give everyone a chance to vote. Just asking, how are you active, or are you actively using feature flags in your CD process today with yes, no, or I don't know? Give this maybe 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and here we are.
All right, very good. So we've got the people that are a bit ahead of the curve at 19%, and it looks like we've got 80% are either at no or we don't know for those that voted. So very good. That is about what I would expect at this time. And so I think, for the no's and you don't knows, I mean, that's not a bad thing. I think that's, you're in the right place for the next hour, and especially those for the yeses, I think you can hopefully get some best practices out of how to do feature flags and continuous delivery as well. So I know there is a heavy contingent of folks that are most likely on the the ops or the release management side of the house today. So we do want to give a brief introduction to feature flags, as they tend to be considered more of a developer's tool, but they are widely impacting the ops side of the house as well. And we really see them as, one of the connecting bridges between dev and ops, something that we're always looking for. So without further ado, we'll dive into, a very brief primer on feature flags, and then we'll dive into, feature flags and CD from there. So for the folks that are perhaps completely new to the feature flags, they may also be known as flippers or toggles in your organization. But at the most basic level, a feature flag, that sounds so simple, but if something happens, then something else happens as well. But what's very important about this if statement is that it changes in runtime, it changes without you redeploying the application. So that is a very powerful concept, and that's something that we're going to hone in on today. I will note that feature flags, they are not a brand new technology per se. They've been used by developers for some time, but the true formalization of their usage, their management, scaling them across organizations, permanently embedding them into the CI/CD toolchain, that is a bit of a new concept, because at a very small level, managing a feature flag is easy. Trying to manage it across larger development teams and fully connecting it with visibility and governance across dev and ops, that's a bigger animal altogether. So the management is kind of what we're focusing on today. So, how do feature flags impact the traditional software delivery lifecycle? It's first, let's kind of level set on what, at CloudBees we consider the software delivery lifecycle. You've got plan and design, build, test, release and deploy is one step. And if you're familiar with CloudBees at all, our traditional tool chain, we're focused on CI and CD. And finally we have maintain at the end. So this is what you would consider your SDLC without feature flags. Adding feature flags to the mix, though, plan and design is largely the same. Though, I think there could be an argument that later on flags will impact those as well. But, where you really start to see the initial changes are here and within the CI/CD pipeline. So, the first big change is in how you do CI, and feature flags. They allow you to do trunk-based development, but also, fold any branches that you have back into the trunk and just disable them so that, they're continually getting updated. So, the long time merge hell that I'm sure any developer is familiar with, where, you're trying to integrate all your code into a trunk at once, and you get all of the many merge issues that arise, that's largely eliminated using feature flags because, those branches are always back in trunk, and they're just disabled. So that's a very big concept. An area we're going to focus on today, moving on to like the CD side of the house, is with code deploy. And the fact that feature flags enable you to deploy incomplete features, and we'll show why that is and how that is in a few minutes. But what this really gives you is release schedule predictability. But the big kind of aha moment here of feature flags is the fact that code deploy and feature release are now decoupled. If you think about the SDLC I showed in the last slide, of course, that's generally one big bang step for companies that are not using feature flags. So, to level set on terms and what we're talking about here, code deploy, we see this as the technical act of moving code into production. Feature release, that is the business decision of when customers receive a new feature. So by decoupling those, it provides a number of advantages. Developers are no longer tied into the business scheduled releases and vice versa, so they can kind of work in their, on their own pace. And then when code is deployed, they can move on to the next project without kind of hanging in there to see, when they need to actually show it to customers. This also allows features to be released to subsets of users, whether that is, internal QA testers in production, maybe beta external users, that want to receive the code first. But, even past that, it's a gradual release, to all of your user base. And the point being that, you get to monitor that live feature in production to ensure that it's performing as you wish and as your customers want to see. And that's what we call progressive delivery here at CloudBees, and it's a very powerful concept. And finally, by decoupling these things, it actually also provides another level of risk mitigation, in that you can now kill the feature and just roll it back without redeploying. Not to mention just that feature, but the entire release as a whole. And that's also a concept in CD that we're going to hone in on today. So that's kind of, the new SDLC as we see it with feature flags. And, I'm going to talk about that's great. And that's great to see the boxes move, but what will this really mean for your business, just by adding feature flags to them. So like I just said, the first big area is risk mitigation. The fact that you can kill a feature without redeploying means that it's, you can get much quicker back to where you want to be if a feature doesn't perform as needed. That also lowers the blast radius. So again, if you think of that progressive delivery concept and, only a small fraction of your user base is seeing that before you realize like that feature is not performing or, it's buggy, whatever else, it's not one big bang release where, you're getting the bad social media attention and all that. You're just have a few people that, realize it's bad, you roll it back, and then, no one's any of the wiser, right? And, I'd also add the fact that you can test in production. This gives you much more confidence within a release because, as we'll talk about, there is only so much you can mimic production in pre-production testing. Even the best pre-production testing, it's not as good as the real thing. Software is just getting that much more dynamic with that much more intricacy in production. And the fact that you can test it there means that you're going to be more confident when the entire user base has it. So, second, feature flags, they really improve developer productivity. And this is where I talked about, the trunk-based development and the fact that, merge hell should be largely eliminated moving forward. The decoupling of deployment from release, again, we see this as a productivity item for developers and the business because they no longer have to work lockstep anymore. Developers can finish, a feature, they can deploy it, and then they can move on to the next thing. And that's, that should really make both sides much happier. And finally, like I said, we're going to hone in on testing in production and how that impacts CD in a moment. But, if you do it correctly, you're really kind of, you're expediting that process of testing, which, as you all know on the phone, this is, probably the slowest piece of a new release because it takes so long. And finally, we like to touch on that feature flags can really shorten feedback loops with users. And, the reason for that is, again, back to this concept of progressive delivery, where, you get to put new features out in production much quicker, much sooner, and you get that live feedback in whatever method you choose before it's live for the entire, the entire user base. So, no more big bangs, release it to the folks that you want it to based on any of the criteria that, you have from them in their database. And, make sure you're getting like the feature feedback that you want from what other application management tool performance management tool you're using. So I do want to touch on, a few myths about feature flags because, we bring up this concept to, new customers, we bring it up at events, and there's kind of some similar themes about usage of feature flags and, like what they are and aren't, and myth or misconception number one that, comes up a lot, using feature flags is a risk because it lets developers change code in production. I don't really think this is actually a misconception because it's true. If you don't have the governance and the processes in place, to let your developers, have that handoff of code and changes between developers and ops, this could potentially be the Wild West. And what we see with a lot of customers that are coming to us like that probably are somewhat familiar with feature flags, and they like elements of them, but they've also seen the confusion caused by them as well. This is an area that can be a pain point, and it kind of needs to be pulled in, right? So we don't see it as big a deal because again, we are in the feature flag management business, but you do need to have that level of governance, of visibility, the safeguards in place between your feature flag management and your operations tools to ensure that there is still a very defined process between dev and ops to use flags, get the benefits, and also have none of the negatives of developers impacting code in production when you don't want them to. So next, kind of the inverse of this, but something that we've literally had customers say to us, feature flags eliminate the need for release teams and processes. And I just want to be clear, absolutely not. This is not. I have to chuckle a bit when I even hear this because feature flags are really one more tool in the tool belt of release teams, one more tool in the tool belt of dev teams, and really, with the exception of some small changes and of how you're doing things, there's really no change to the status quo. It's just that much more level of risk reduction, that much more velocity, and again, by syncing tools and by kind of level setting on processes, dev and ops are operating in business as usual, and there's no tools releasing the need for these processes that work really well and these teams that work really well together. And finally, the last misconception that we've gotten particularly from more regulated industries, there's the misconception that feature flags work for the Ubers and the Netflixes of the world, and some of these really cutting edge companies that are doing like ahead of the curve for software development, Facebook, and it's true. These were the companies out there that, pioneered like the standardization of feature flag management within CI and CD, but by no means are they the only types of companies that are using feature flags today. And I'm just going to come back and say, with the right usage and governance and visibility of feature flags, this is one more tool for safety and reliability in the release process that any regulated industry, be it finance, be it healthcare, government, whatever else, they're going to want to use flags as well. And we've got plenty of customers that are highly regulated using flags, in a hybrid IT environment. So very well used across, regardless of industry. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Justin. He's going to dive a little more into CD and then talk about, really the changes that feature flags impact within the CD process.
Thanks, Nick. So great to meet everyone. For just a little notion of background, I've spent, prior to my time at CloudBees, almost 4 years implementing continuous delivery and application release orchestration in industries large and small. So I've definitely spent a fair bit of time in my career actually trying to drive these initiatives forward. So, just to sort of set the scene for this notion of continuous delivery versus continuous deployment, from the sort of traditional definition, continuous delivery is a software development discipline where you build software in such a way that you can release to production at any time. Typically you're doing continuous delivery when your software is deployable throughout its life cycle, when your team prioritizes keeping software deployable over working on new features. You're doing continuous delivery when anyone can get fast automated feedback on the production readiness of their systems. And when you can perform maybe push button deployments of any version of the software to any environment on demand. So it's sometimes confusing between delivery and deployment continuously, but the kind of classical difference here is that deployment means that every change goes through the pipeline and automatically gets into production. So that results in many production deployments every day, whereas continuous delivery, that more means that you're doing frequent deployments, but you may choose not to, usually due to businesses preferring a slower rate of deployment. So in order to do continuous deployment, you must be doing continuous delivery. And then the last point is that automated release orchestration, or ARO, may lessen the need for manual push button deployments in production, but we would still like to, call out this distinction for level setting. So, as you all are familiar, possibly from the release management side or just general DevOps, there are some places where continuous delivery can fall short. So because all users are running the same production code, testing occurs only in internal test environments without real-world factors. Also, deployments and releases are typically conjoined, so errors impact the entire user base. In addition, there is a limited ability to roll out new features to targeted subsets of the customer base or internal groups for testing and feedback. And also, some segments of your customer base may not want to receive continuous updates to their system, perhaps because of audit and compliance on their side, or maybe they're, just to have a more legacy approach to their update process. And sort of lastly here, you need developers to be involved in rollback, which slows down the release and deployment cycles and also interrupts and distracts from new development work. So now we're going to talk a little bit about adding flags to continuous delivery and just call out some of the ways that we can try to fill these gaps that we've just outlined. So, generally, continuous delivery is focused on the tactical delivery of actual bits and focusing on features as more of a next level maturity within an organization. So just to kind of call out this dichotomy, with traditional CD, you're focusing on release delivery, whereas when you have CD with feature flags, you can talk more about a more granular style of delivering features, which we'll discuss in the slides coming. And then also with traditional CD, you're emphasizing, your target environments as opposed to being able to, emphasize the customer from CD plus feature flags with targeting. And another challenge with CD is that, there's an emphasis on intensive pre-production testing, as Nick highlighted earlier. Traditionally we try to do everything possible that we can before production to test, but that doesn't necessarily account for all real world cases. So with feature flags, we can start to test in production with guardrails. Also traditional CD tends to bring limited granularity of user testing. So, you're generally just trying to test like based on your use cases that were given to QA or something like that. Whereas when feature flags and you're able to test more in production, you can have user testing based on any characteristics in the database. Next few things are sort of all or nothing rollout or rollback of release. And that's usually based on feature dependencies and performance. So in a traditional CD, you have this sort of big bang moment where you are releasing all of your code, and if for some reason you run into some issues, you have to roll back all of that code, and so that can cause increased downtimes. So when you pair CD with feature flags, you can instead have independent feature releases that can be quickly rolled out or back without impacting others. And then the last thing that's seen with traditional continuous delivery is that business teams and developers must work in tandem to deploy and release to production. So whereas when you have feature flags, you're actually deploying code to production while the business, maybe product or executives decide on when to release the feature to customers. So you can have this sort of decoupling between the development activities and the business side. So I think those are really important call outs here. So now we're going to look at an example of a traditional Canary release. So that's, for those unfamiliar, when you select a random percentage of users to route to servers with a new version, and over time you add more servers until the whole user base has the new release. And it requires ops teams to stay involved in the whole process. And there are limited methods for targeting the user to test a new feature on. So, it's nice because you can test new versions with real users in production, but you can fall into some pain points because, it's pretty challenging and infrastructure base to, roll back and release, as well as, you do have to, as seen in this image, you are managing multiple versions at one time. So there's additional overhead while you're sort of bridging the gap between your two versions. As well as, it's pretty tough to target user characteristics in this style. So, again, you are used to, you're not able to target that 5% of users to receive the new version. You're kind of just giving it to any 5%. So that targeting is also a really important capability. So now we're going to look at how this could be done with feature flags. So in contrast to traditional Canary style deployments, Canaries using feature flags live in the application layer. Here, the ops team deploys the entire new feature once, and then the product team can progressively turn on the new features based on users or some select criteria like language, version, geography, maybe they're beta users, and that kind of thing. So that is allowed to be chosen at the convenience of the product team. And then on our diagram on the right, you can see during a Canary launch, version 2 of the release has been deployed everywhere, but only selected users have received it. And then over time, assuming it receives the expected reception, all the users are progressively moved over to version 2 by the product team. So hopefully that makes some sense in the difference between the two. Again, using Canary release with feature flags, you can test new versions with real users in production, and you can get really granular with how you are dividing your users for testing. And there are some cons still where testing can be more complex if not planned. And, initial process change as new members of teams, like the devs are responsible for shifting users to new versions. So, it's not the, utopia, but it does offer a lot of benefits over traditional Canary. So now we're going to walk through a change. So let's break down what a release versus feature granularity really means, along with an example shown on the screen. So at the top, we have traditional release where all features must be included and released at the same time. So as you can see, they're all in the box together at commit. Most companies operate in this model today with orchestration at the release level, where the entire release doesn't move forward if there are issues with one feature. So in our example, the release has 4 features. At the testing phase, feature 3 has more bugs than anticipated, and that causes the release as a whole to be delayed entirely until it's fixed, getting the release as a whole off schedule. Further, once the release is deployed to production and all customers have received it at once, they realize that our 4 feature does not work as the user's desire, and it's bad enough that we have to redeploy the entire release after it's fixed. So now we're going to contrast this approach with a release using feature flags with granularity at the release level versus the feature level versus the full release level. So instead, with feature flags at the testing phase, the unanticipated delays that were caused by our extra bug in feature 3, that doesn't delay the other features being released, as they're still able to be deployed to production with feature 3 flipped off. And then all 3 remaining features are progressively rolled out to users. And early on, the release team recognizes that feature 4 is not well accepted by users. So only a fraction of their user base saw this feature before they had to roll it back and improve it. And features 1 and 2 were able to stay live in production without a mass release rollback of everything at once. So my colleague Doug will show an example of this process in action later on, but you can see the benefits of increased release velocity, risk reduction, and better feature releases based on live user interaction by using feature flags. So now we're going to talk about delivery schedule consistency. So as you can see in the last example, feature flags can create much improved release velocity, as they can break up dependencies of release being orchestrated at once, versus a collection of features. So this means that a group of features is not held up because one is extra buggy, making release managers look better. You're able to meet your release deadlines still, even if one feature isn't actually included in that release. You're still able to stay on track with your larger business and product direction. This also means that the entire releases are not rolled back due to an error in production, and we see that makes teams much happier. And it's also nice that it can be progressively delivered versus big bang, so that you can minimize your blast radius for new features when you're not sure of the impact that you may have there. One other notion is that being able to release at the feature level also allows dev and ops teams to deploy code once and then let production or business decide when to turn the features on based on some campaigns or other business priorities. So let's talk about another change, which is, you can increasingly shift testing to production. And as you all know, software testing comes down to accepting risk or compromising velocity in a release. That's just an unavoidable fact of software development. So also load and environment testing can be done as a simulation, but it's never the real thing. So we'll never know for sure about a feature until it's in production. So that's where feature flags come in to enable your quality assurance teams to take the guesswork out of your pre-production test environments and test immediately in production. So I wanted to take a minute to discuss why the term testing in production may sound scary, but it really doesn't need to be. A feature can be deployed to production, but not seen by any end user except for internal testers. In a sense, it provides the real-life test environment without the exposure to outside users. Then, once your internal team is satisfied, you can progressively roll out the feature to, maybe customer beta testers or other predetermined live user groups. And then as performance and confidence grows, eventually the feature can be rolled out to all users, with the end result being a ideally fantastically boring release where the users love it and there's no surprises to the engineering teams. So there is one consideration, which is test complexity. So, as we call it on the screen, at the time that a given deployable artifact is moving through a CD pipeline, we can't know whether the toggle will be, at some point turned on or off in production. Of course, that's the whole point of feature flags, is that you're not really sure when they'll be turned on for production. So, potentially, in order to, you may need to validate all code paths, which end up live in production. So, you could kind of end up with this complicated space where you're performing your artifact tests in both states. And while that's true, in reality, the situation, isn't as bad as some testers might imagine. So while a feature flagged release candidate does need testing with some different toggle configurations, it's not necessary to test every possible permutation of toggling. And that's because most feature flags will not interact with each other, and most releases will not involve a change to the configuration of more than one feature flag. And something else to consider is that, an enterprise feature flag management solution should have a notion of flag dependencies, so that, when you do run into this, you can define those relationships, directly inside of a feature flag tool. So, that's kind of enough about CD itself. So I think I'll pass it back to Nick, and we're going to talk about CD plus feature flags.
Thanks, Justin. So yeah, I want to summarize these concepts that he kind of highlighted, because internally here at CloudBees, we're this is kind of a new concept to formally pull these two these two disciplines and tools together, and so we're calling that CD++ for now. If you have a better term, we'll be happy to give you a prize. But the first big thing that we want to drive home is that your entire organization is shifting from the release mindset and the shifting of bits mindset to feature granularity. And that this is a mindset shift of how you get features out the door, and frankly how you design them from the first place, because no longer do you have to have your your 3-month sprint where you're getting these all out at once. It can be much more smaller, iterative, and focused on those one at a time features. Next up, for the release managers on the phone, hopefully this gets you a little excited, because you now have release consistency. I mean, there's a steady stream of innovation. You can ship all features that are ready on schedule, and you can turn off the ones at once that you don't want in production. And no longer are you having any sort of major delays, because you can disable that buggy feature, fix it and turn it back on, at the given time, in production. And this gives, hopefully a level of comfort and, kind of standardized velocity moving forward that you didn't have before. Again, better, faster testing. And, this is testing in production. It sounds scary. It shouldn't be, because, when you have these tools in place, it is just as regulated as any other type of testing, and you have the ability to make it variegated and low impactful, and broaden it on the level you want. Next, again, reduced risk. You can roll back features without redeploying, and there's no headaches on the dev and ops team when you do have to inevitably do some sort of rollback. And the entire release doesn't have to be rolled back anymore due to one bug. So, mean time to mitigation is a way that we're going to call it. This because the time it takes to get back to how you were before, is much smaller, right? And that's different than mean time to repair. And lastly, and this is more conceptual, but I mean, think about the possibilities for your own organizations. I mean, there's just much more shared visibility and governance by using feature flags within dev and ops, right? I mean, there's a level of connectedness, and frankly, Doug's going to show you this in a moment, just because finally you can see the same feature being flagged on both your CD tools as well as your flagging tools. And there's the kind of historical devs throwing code over the fence to the ops team and wiping their hands clean and moving on to the next thing. And that's no longer the case, and you're finally working off of like the same set of data throughout this process. So to kind of drive this point home, I want to talk about, overall feature flag maturity and CI/CD, and how this process is typically going to look like for most organizations. And starting out, most, most of the folks on the phone today, I think roughly 80% either weren't using feature flags in their CD processes or they didn't know. But let me just kind of dispel any rumors. Chances are your organization is using feature flags today, whether you know it or not. And if you're on the ops team, then you probably shouldn't know it. But there are devs in silos most likely using feature flags today, and that's just because they are a long time development tool. They have very clear benefits, and regardless of whether you're managing it or not at scale, they're being used. But at some point, these organizations, most likely someone on the engineering management side realizes, okay, we like feature flags, but we need to scale it to the point that it's going to work for our entire enterprise. Is going to work to the point that it's also going to work with our ops teams and the data they want to see. Most companies, they kind of have a choice. They either invest heavily into their, as we call it, their homegrown management system of flags, and hopefully that works. Or they, and look externally, and they look at a tool like us or someone else that can give you that enterprise scale without without all the infrastructure and the headaches internally on how to keep it live. So at that point, you hit feature flag management, and this is where you start to get that standardized visibility and scale, scalability, governance across your entire tool. This is where what we call feature flag driven development starts. Where you're really kind of thinking about developing, with that feature mindset, and with that, we can make small risks and push it out to production and test it, for the hope that it's going to turn into something big without any major errors or rollbacks on our end. And, that's very important to think about. The next stage, this is really what we're talking about today. This is what we're calling enterprise progressive delivery. And this is where, by injecting feature flags into your CI and CD processes permanently, formalizing it and creating that, that shared view of flags across CI CD, particularly CD, now you're pulling your ops teams in, and QA and ops, they get to see what flags to pass or deploy. Doug's going to show that in a moment. And really, this is where you start to see that organizational shift from, a feature, from looking at releases through, a feature lens versus a product release, and a bits release, so to speak. So that is kind of where, where we're headed with kind of how we develop our own tools. And of course, this gets you to kind of the, we'll call it the holy grail, where, we would like to see all teams go, this ideal future state where you have, complete full shared visibility and governance. And you're moving, everyone from your product team, your devs, to release, to customer success. They're all kind of looking at development and new features through this lens of we deliver value. That value is delivered via features, and we deliver features now. And that's a very powerful concept. And of course, to really achieve that, you need to also have very good visibility and management across all of your tool sets. And that's kind of where we're doubling down on as well. And so to achieve this, we kind of have like our new view of the world at CloudBees in two areas, right? We have our CloudBees software delivery automation, which is our delivery suite. And what we've realized is there's just ever increasing complexity in tool sets around CI/CD, and that's not going away. It's only going to get worse. And we're really designing our own tool set around what we're calling an enterprise grade comprehensive SDLC. And for us, that's 3 products, and 2 of them, we're looking at today, and you're seeing that in action. And that's, CloudBees feature flags, CI, formerly known as Core, CloudBees CD, formerly known as Flow, all working together with a common system of record, for kernel, identity, admin, reporting services. And what that, that gives you, or, later on, it's better innovation, it's really risk mitigation, because now you do have common governance and visibility across these tools. And, it's optimizing because you don't have to, create different views for, many niche tools across the board. And, I do want to highlight, we came to this realization. We've been in the DevOps game for a while, but, just this year, Gartner put out their own report saying essentially the exact same thing. And that, that there's really 3 routes that any DevOps team can go. And that is, you're going to have value stream delivery platforms. So for us, that's our SDA platform I just described. You're going to have value stream management platforms. If you know anything about CloudBees, that's our overarching management and government view with our software delivery management tool. And finally, you're going to have some best of breed niche DevOps tools out there. I mean, there are a ton of great companies out there that do one thing really well in the process of CI/CD. And you should not have to give up that one tool that your team loves just because you want to adopt a platform, right? So you're going to have some mix of these three. Every company will. With that said, as organizations grow in maturity, Gartner does expect the number of standalone tools to be reduced, and over time, you're going to find your delivery value chains that you want to find groups of tools that can talk and have that common system of record. And then you're going to probably have a few standalone niche tools on the side. So that's kind of where we expect it to go. That's where Gartner sees it going, and that's again kind of the value that we're about to show you with regard to our CDE and our feature flag tool that directly aligns with kind of this concept as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug, and he's going to kind of show you that this is not all slideware whatsoever, and we can actually do this live in action today at CloudBees with completely changing, from release granularity down to the feature level, and what use cases that would look like within your own organization.
All right, well, thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. I'm Doug Tidwell. I am part of the demo infrastructure team here at CloudBees, and it is my pleasure to show you this stuff actually working in real life. If we can move forward one more slide, and then I will steal the screen for the demo. Just to set the table here, we are not going to cover the CI side. This starts, obviously, a developer commits code. That kicks off a build at CloudBees CI. We can just keep rolling through this slide. I forgot we had animations here. But once we build that code, we run some unit tests, we create a container image, and then where we're going to pick it up is in CloudBees CD. We're going to retrieve that image from a container registry. We're going to deploy it to a QA environment. Then we're going to start working with feature flags. So what we're pulling out of the repository is a release candidate. We believe this is something that's ready to ship, but we want to use the magic of feature flags once we've deployed it to a QA environment to make sure this is ready to go out to the world. So let me steal the screen here and show you this. This is CloudBees CD. This is version 10, so it's the very latest version, but everything I'm going to show you also works on version 9.2 if you're still on that version. So this is a release pipeline. We have got several stages here. We've got a readiness stage that sets up audit trails so that later when I want to look back at Jira tickets, Jenkins build results, etc., I can do that. Then we have 3 stages with 3 different environments. What we've done, and I put this stage here, or this step in the stage to stop the pipeline, but we have deployed that release candidate to a QA environment, and it looks just like this. I hope you can all hold your applause until the end of the presentation. This is not a terribly exciting application, but it does have a couple of features that use feature flags inside it. So as we go through the release pipeline, from the release manager's point of view, I can change those flags and we'll see different behavior in this application, and we can make a decision as to whether we want to continue or not. So I will go ahead and get this thing back in action. We will continue. I'll click OK, and this will go through several steps here. The next thing it does, this uses the feature flags plugin for CloudBees CD to interact with CloudBees feature flags. In this case, I'm turning on a feature flag for the title. All right, so that will take a little bit of time here. What I do want to show you, though, is a more traditional version of this same pipeline. So we've got our audit reports set up here, and we've got a QA pre-prod and prod environment. But as Justin and Nick said earlier, this is an all or nothing approach. We do not have the granularity to say part of this release candidate is working just fine, part needs some work, but with this pipeline, I can't do anything about that. If the whole thing isn't good, ready to ship, we have to stop the release. So let's take a look back here at our current pipeline. We are setting up the feature flag there. We will see that change the title. There we go. Isn't that magical? We have a new title that's part of this UI because we set the feature flag. So I will continue this. Let's all agree this feature is beautiful. I love it. It brings tears to my eyes. So definitely we're going to ship that. So we have a manual decision here inside the pipeline. Yes, we want to ship it by all means. When I say we want to ship it, this will skip the next feature or the next step in the stage, which is to disable that flag. So we'll turn on a flag, we'll test that particular feature, and then based on that, we will either go to ship with that flag turned on, or we will ship with that flag turned off. Let me show you quickly. This is the CloudBees feature flags console. I have my title flag. As you just saw, we set that to true. If I look at sidebar, it's probably still false, and it is. And we mentioned auditability. If I look at auditability, we can see everything that's happened. I'll change this to the last 24 hours. That's more interesting. What happened briefly, not too long ago, is that I used that external API, which is the plugin inside CloudBees CD, changing the value of the feature flag. So let's check on our pipeline run, see how we're doing. We are still waiting for this to be enabled. And if I look at my application now, again, I didn't have to reload this. We now have this new feature. This is a list of all the people that are logged in to our blogging app. And I'm looking at this, I'm not totally happy with it, to be honest. I really wish that the bottom of this area were flush with the bottom of the area over here. And it might not be a bad idea to have some visual space between these two components. So I'm going to go back to the pipeline and in here, ship the sidebar feature. I'm going to say no. So when I click OK, what will happen now is my release pipeline will invoke this task to disable that particular feature. So that once that has been disabled, what I'm shipping now is my release candidate with one of the two new features enabled. I don't have to stop, abandon the whole release, and come back later. In this case, all of the features that we're using are part of the release candidate, but I will leave you with one other use case. I was talking to someone from a bank that all of you have heard of. What they were saying they do is if they have, for example, a microservice that's going to be used by a new release, if for whatever reason a particular microservice isn't ready yet, what they will do is go ahead and deploy the code with the feature flag turned off. Once the microservice comes online, I can then do a Canary deployment to say, start using this microservice. Obviously, we want to test that in production to make sure everything is fine. But in that case, I don't even have to redeploy to move on to totally new function in my application.